we are sitting at session highs across the board. You see the Dow there up 285. One name, though, sitting out the rally is Goldman Sachs. That stock taking a dive midday. By far the biggest drag on the Dow. That's after the Wall Street Journal published a story saying the Federal Reserve is looking into whether the bank had proper safeguards in place around its consumer business. Goldman responded to our request for a comment by saying, quote, "The Federal Reserve is our primary federal bank regulator, and we do not comment on the accuracy or inaccuracy of matters relating to discussions with them." Let's bring in one of the reporters who broke that story, Anna Maria Andriotis from the Wall Street Journal. And Anna Maria, what can you tell us about perhaps what the focus of this probe might be? What parts of the consumer operations seem like they're under scrutiny here?
So the probe is broad, and it's focused on lending that's happened under the Marcus brand. So the Federal Reserve is investigating Goldman's consumer business broadly to determine whether the bank had appropriate safeguards in place, essentially as it was ramping up lending. So this is broad, and this started as part of a normal review process back in 2021 that then actually became an investigation starting last year.
Interesting. So, you know, the Marcus business, the consumer lending and deposit-taking business at Goldman was relatively new, and I'm sure kind of ramped up relatively quickly. Do you know, or do we know, if there were, you know, a pattern of consumer complaints, or if there are any other kind of compliance missteps along the way that seem to give an indication of why the market might be concerned here?
So that's one of the things that the Fed is looking into. It's examining what happened in instances of customer harm, including whether issues that were flagged internally pertaining to that, were they addressed, were they properly resolved? Part of the issue here as well has to do with the rate at which lending grew, and the Marcus division essentially broadened out into consumer lending, and questions around whether there were proper monitoring and control systems in place to handle the existing consumer business as well as it kept developing and expanding.
Interesting. And now CEO of Goldman Sachs, David Solomon, this week did actually comment on the strategy around the consumer business and how it has evolved. Let's listen to that.
We probably took on more than we should have, you know, too much too quickly. But I think we now have a very good deposits business. We're working on our cards platform, and I think the partnership with Apple is going to pay meaningful dividends for the firm over time. We have this acquisition of Green Sky. We think it's a good business. And so we're going to give people a clearer view. There's more transparency around how they can contribute.
Now, Anna Maria, I mean, there have been some trimming of ambitions, I guess, in that business. There's some layoffs there, some concerns about, you know, whether the Apple Card business is going to be profitable. You cover Goldman. What do we think is ultimately going to be the scope of this business, whether, in fact, it stays under the regulatory sights or not?
So a few things to think about. First, they are already backing down on several different elements of their consumer business. They're winding down personal loans. They are not going to move forward with their checking account ambitions, at least on the large scale, but they were planning to do that. And then you have the credit card division. The things there become trickier because you can't just pull the plug on something where a partnership exists with other companies, like in this case with Apple, as well as with GM. The Green Sky acquisition, I mean, how do you pull back on something that you acquired not that long ago? This also really points to how complicated consumer lending, credit cards, consumer banking in general is. Consumer complaints can go a really long way with regulators. Goldman already disclosed last year that they're under investigation by the CFPB for their credit card operations. And just in what Goldman disclosed, you can tell that inaccuracies, mistakes, even small missteps in consumer banking and lending can really result in trouble for big banks, Goldman included. What's really interesting about the Fed probe is how wide-ranging this is with regards to what the Fed is looking at. It encompasses Goldman's compliance functions as well as audit and legal. Essentially, were there enough controls in place? What was known about any particular issues? And were those issues actually addressed, issues pertaining to consumer harm?
Yeah, It is fascinating. I mean, it seems like it's essentially a lot of attention on whether they had the proper compliance infrastructure for a consumer business. Now, I think back. I mean, Goldman was essentially forced to become a bank holding company around the global financial crisis. Never necessarily sought that out, and it seemed like they thought, well, we have kind of the general financial infrastructure and plumbing in place. Why not extend our brand into the consumer area? I just wonder if the way investors are selling off the stock today, it seems like perhaps an unnecessary complication to the overall business.
Well, this made sense in the beginning. The idea of offering savings accounts, deposits, the benefits of that to the bank, that was clear-cut, and I think still is clear-cut. However, where things start to get complicated is as the question of, and as you said, David Solomon pointed it out on the earnings call, did the bank try to do too much all at once? You know, we talk about personal loans, we talk about credit cards, but there were other elements of lending as well that the bank tiptoed into, right? Point of sale financing, the JetBlue partnership there. There were a variety of different consumer banking and lending initiatives that the bank either actually executed on and implemented or was in the process of rolling out that never actually came to be. Questions basically around how much is too much in a span of 5, 6 or so years, the costs associated with that. And at this point, quite frankly, the growing regulatory scrutiny.
Interesting. Anna Maria, appreciate you kind of telling us what you know from your story today. Anna Maria Andriotis.